Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
It was a Friday in early November, right before the long weekend, and the mood at Granger High was electric. Students were already mentally checked out, half the teachers had resorted to movies, and even the principal had been seen smiling in the hallway. But that feeling of anticipation was shattered at 1:37 p.m. when the loudspeakers crackled with a monotone voice. "This is a lockdown, I repeat. This is a lockdown. Secure all doors, stay silent, this is not a drill." At first, many thought it was a mistake or a poorly timed drill, but when the second announcement came, slower, firmer, and almost shaking, the laughter and groans died out. Something in the way the voice trembled said everything they needed to know. Inside room 3B, Miss Dalton's sophomore English class moved with mechanical panic. Desks were pushed aside, lights flicked off, the door was locked, and everyone huddled into the corner farthest from the hallway. Someone whispered that they'd seen a figure through the glass, tall, hunched, and standing oddly still. No one knew what to say, so they just waited, breathing in silence, their ears attuned to every creak of the building. Then came the footsteps. Not from the hallway, but from above. Heavy, slow, thud, thud, right over their heads as if someone was walking across the ceiling. The problem was, there was no attic above that wing, just the roof. Someone whispered that maybe it was a cop, maybe security. But the way the steps dragged didn't feel right. It wasn't purposeful like someone looking for danger. It was aimless, like something that didn't quite know where it was going. The lights flickered. A low hum vibrated through the floor. Phones buzzed in a wave as emergency texts rolled in. "Police on scene. Do not open the door for anyone." And then the doorknob turned. Every student saw it. A slow, deliberate jiggle. It wasn't frantic. It wasn't someone desperately trying to escape. It was methodical, like someone testing each handle. A girl in the back, Megan, started to cry silently. Miss Dalton put her finger to her lips, but her hand was shaking so badly she almost poked her own eye. They all sat there, frozen, for what felt like an hour, but in reality was maybe 3 minutes. The handle stopped moving, and the soft scrape of footsteps receded down the hall. Then, silence. More time passed. No updates, no more messages. Then they heard a sound they'd never forget. A scream, high, cut short, strangled, from somewhere down the hall, followed by pounding, violent banging on metal lockers, as if someone or something was slamming a body against them. It was close. It was real. The students began shaking uncontrollably, some praying under their breath, others trying to muffle sobs with sleeves and fists. Then it stopped again. A few minutes later, a knock came at the door, 3 times, then a pause, then 3 more. Miss Dalton didn't move. They all remembered the warning, "Do not open the door for anyone." A muffled voice said, "It's Officer Keene, open the door." But something was wrong. Officer Keene was well known, a friendly figure who often smiled and talked to students. This voice was flat, emotionless, too rehearsed. Miss Dalton didn't respond. "Ma'am, I know you're in there, open up." Still no response. The voice paused, then said, "I can hear you breathing." One of the boys in the front threw up into his hoodie, and the smell of vomit filled the air. The door was tested again. A shake, a pull, then silence. After what felt like an eternity, the intercom crackled once more. "All clear. The lockdown is now over. Return to your 7th period class." No one moved, not even Miss Dalton. 2 minutes later, the door was unlocked by actual police. Real ones, with vests, radios, and tired eyes. They told the class to follow them. Single file, out through the east wing. Everyone was accounted for. No one had broken in. Nothing had been found on the roof. No bodies, no blood. Just drag marks down the science hallway and 2 large scratches across the inside of the gym door, 10 feet high. The school never officially acknowledged what happened that day. Police blamed the lockdown on an anonymous threat called into the front office. But no one could explain the scratches, or the voice, or why Officer Keene had been out sick that day, in the hospital, recovering from surgery. The scariest part? Months later, when the janitor was replacing ceiling tiles after a winter leak, he found something wedged between the metal support beams above room 3B, a tattered piece of a school ID. It was bent, torn in half, with dried blood smeared across the photo. They never identified who it belonged to. And every year since, on the same day in November, someone reports hearing footsteps above that room. And sometimes the doorknob still turns.
Story number 2.
It was the dead of winter when Hill Ridge High went into lockdown, the kind where the cold outside mirrors the dread inside. January 14th, a Thursday. The sun had set early, casting a sickly orange glow through the frost-covered windows. Eighth period was winding down when the announcement came, but this time there was no voice, just the harsh, distorted buzz of the intercom going live. Then again, buzz, static, then silence. Miss Harris, a first-year biology teacher, furrowed her brow and reached for the classroom phone. No dial tone. She moved to the hallway, but the lights out there were flickering. Before she could step out, the emergency lockdown alarm started to blare. Short bursts of sound followed by silence. This was no drill. That was obvious. Miss Harris locked the door and ushered her students into the lab storage room, where the only light came from a dim red emergency bulb. They waited, confused. Someone whispered that they'd seen a man with a hoodie in the parking lot earlier, pacing along the fence. Someone else said they'd heard a scream before the alarm. But phones had no signal. The school's Wi-Fi was down. And outside, the wind howled like it was alive. A crash echoed from somewhere above, heavy, too loud to be a falling object. The ceiling dusted down particles as the building groaned. Then the fire alarm went off, conflicting with the lockdown. It wasn't supposed to do that. Protocol said alarms were disabled during lockdowns to avoid confusion. But the siren screamed anyway, and something about the sound felt off, glitched, warped, like a looped recording played too many times. Through the lab's tiny interior window, the students saw flickers of movement, fast, blurry shapes darting across the hallway, never fully visible. One of the shapes stopped and turned, just a dark silhouette. That's when the lights died. In the pitch-black storage room, someone started whispering a prayer. Then someone else began giggling, soft at first but rising. Too loud, too out of place. It was Jackson Miller, a quiet kid who never talked to anyone. He was rocking back and forth, laughing uncontrollably, eyes wide open. "He's here," Jackson kept repeating. "He's in the walls." Suddenly, the door to the lab creaked open, not forced, not broken, just slowly eased inward. Miss Harris tried to keep the students quiet, but everyone heard it. Heavy breathing just on the other side. Then a knock on the storage room door. It came in a pattern. 1, 2, pause, 5 fast taps, a rhythm, not random. Miss Harris whispered, "Who's there?" Silence. The door handle turned, then stopped. Something scraped at the wood, long, deliberate drags like claws or nails. Then footsteps backed away. No one moved for 30 minutes, not a breath. Eventually, the school-wide lights flickered back on. The fire alarm died. A single message came over the intercom. "All students, please report to the gymnasium immediately." But when they left the storage room, the school was empty. Doors hung open. Hallways were trashed. Papers scattered. Lockers dented inward like something had hit them from the inside. Not a single soul in sight. They made their way to the gym. Empty. Then someone pointed to the bleachers, to the wall behind them. Written in thick black soot, "We see you when the lights go out." Authorities later said it was a systems malfunction. An electrical surge. They claimed students and staff had been evacuated as a precaution during the blackout, but nobody remembered being told to leave. Nobody remembered seeing anyone else. And Jackson Miller? He never came back. His parents moved. His house was boarded up by spring. His room left untouched, walls covered in black crayon symbols that no one could recognize, all drawn in the same pattern. 1, 2, pause, 5 fast marks, the same rhythm from the knock. To this day, every January 14th, that hallway in Hill Ridge High loses power for exactly 13 minutes, no matter how many times they rewire it. 13 minutes of total silent darkness. No alarms, no signal, no explanation.
Story number 3.
It was during Spirit Week at Northwood High when the school went into lockdown, right in the middle of the costume contest. The gym was packed with students in silly hats, cheap wigs, vampire teeth, and fake blood. At first, when the alarm sounded, everyone thought it was part of the show, until the doors slammed shut, automatically. All of them. The crowd froze, lights flickered, the mic squealed with deafening feedback. Then a voice came through the intercom, except it wasn't the principal or any adult anyone recognized. It sounded like a child, but distorted, like it was being dragged through static. "I like your masks," it said. Let's see who's real. Laughter erupted from a few kids who still thought it was a prank. But then the main lights cut out. Emergency red floodlights kicked on, bathing the gym in blood-colored shadows. The doors wouldn't open. Phones didn't work. Not even the emergency ones teachers had. Then someone screamed. Not a dramatic high school shriek, a real primal scream. A freshman girl near the bleachers had vanished, just gone. Her friends swore she was right next to them, and then she wasn't. A teacher rushed to the spot and found only her phone, still recording on TikTok, the last frame showing her turning to the side, saying, "What the hell is that?" before the screen went dark. The gym descended into chaos. Students pounded on doors. Teachers yelled for calm. But then the voice came again, clearer now and younger. "Too loud," it hissed. "Be quiet, or I'll take another." And just like that, silence. The air turned cold. Cold enough to see your breath, even with hundreds of people packed into a single room. Some kids started to cry. One teacher tried calling through the office radio, but it only emitted static. Then one of the mascots, a kid in a giant wolf costume, started to convulse. Everyone thought he was having a seizure, but then he stood up too quickly, tilted his head at an unnatural angle, and said in a voice not his own, "Why do you hide behind faces? Let me try one on." And then he began clawing at the inside of the mask, not the costume, but his own skin, screaming, blood soaking the fake fur. By the time two teachers wrestled him to the floor, he was unconscious. When he woke up, he didn't know his name, couldn't even speak, just stared at the ceiling and whispered, "Not mine," over and over. Emergency responders finally got into the gym 40 minutes later, with saws. They had to cut the doors open. No one could explain how they locked from the outside when they were designed for quick escape. They never found the missing girl. Security footage cut out the second the lockdown started. All of it. Wiped. They blamed a power surge. They always do. But that year's yearbook was missing a photo. No one noticed until months later. One student, the girl who vanished, had a blank space where her photo should have been, just a black square. And worse, in the photo credits at the bottom of the page, in tiny print, someone had written, "One of you will go next." Every year since, during Spirit Week, the gym doors are left propped open. They don't do costume contests anymore. And no one wears masks.
Story number 4.
It was the last day of the school year at Southbrook High, and students were buzzing with excitement. The sun was bright, and the air felt thick with anticipation. Everyone was counting down the minutes until the final bell rang, signaling the beginning of summer. But not everyone was in a celebratory mood. Lena, a senior with a quiet reputation, had noticed something strange in the last few weeks. The hallways, which were usually full of chatter and noise, seemed unusually quiet at times. She'd heard whispers in the back corners of classrooms, rumors that didn't make sense, students talking about things they shouldn't have known. Then there was the thing in the library. Lena had found a book wedged between two shelves. It was old, frayed at the edges, with no title on the spine. When she pulled it out, it opened to a page with a list of names, written in neat, sharp handwriting. The names were all students who had graduated the year before. But what chilled Lena more than the names was the last line. "You will be the last." She hadn't told anyone about the book. She didn't know why it had made her feel so uneasy, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Still, she tried to push it out of her mind. It was probably some weird prank, just a book from the back of the library that no one had bothered to touch in years. But when the final bell rang and students poured out of the classrooms into the hallways, Lena noticed something even stranger. There were more teachers than usual, too many, in fact. They were scattered around, staring blankly, not interacting with the students. Their eyes seemed hollow, distant. Then the lights flickered. For just a second, everything went dark. When the lights returned, students laughed, not knowing what was about to unfold. Lena had already started walking toward the exit, but she felt a strange tug at the back of her neck. It was as if something was calling her to the auditorium. Without fully realizing why, she found her feet moving in that direction, even as the rest of the students headed for the parking lot. The auditorium was empty when she arrived, but the stage lights were on, casting long shadows across the seats. She didn't remember seeing anyone else inside, but the doors were locked behind her. As she made her way down the aisle, something caught her eye at the back of the stage. It was the book, the same one she'd found in the library. Only this time, it was open on the stage, in the middle of the floor, as if someone had been waiting for her to arrive. Lena didn't understand how it got there. She stood frozen, her breath catching in her throat. But as she approached the book, the lights above her began to dim again, this time to an unnatural darkness. A soft whispering voice came from nowhere. It was low, almost imperceptible, but it was unmistakably there. "You were chosen." Suddenly she felt something cold, like a hand brushing against her arm, but there was no one around. The hairs on her neck stood up, and she turned around to see rows of empty seats, or at least they seemed empty at first. Then, one by one, she saw faces. Not students. No, these were faces she recognized. Teachers, staff members, even the janitor, all sitting in the chairs, staring at her. Their eyes were hollow, blackened, and their mouths stretched into twisted, unnatural smiles. A voice from the front of the room broke the silence. It was her own name, Lena. She spun around, but there was no one behind her. But then the book flipped open on its own, and the words appeared. Her name, written in the same sharp handwriting, followed by the chilling line, "You will be the last." Before she could scream, the lights went out again, and when the lights flickered back on, Lena was the only one left in the auditorium. The teachers, the students, even the janitor, they were all gone. Not a trace of anyone remained. The doors were locked. The auditorium was empty. She tried to run, tried to escape, but the doors wouldn't budge. She felt her breath catch in her chest, panic rising. What was happening? The whispering voice returned. This time it was everywhere, swirling around her like a storm. "You were always meant to be the last," it hissed. And that was when she understood. The book hadn't been a coincidence. It was a list of everyone who had ever passed through the doors of Southbrook High. Every student, every teacher, every staff member. The names kept appearing, one by one, and when they reached the end, when all the names had been crossed off, Lena's name was last. The door suddenly flew open, and Lena stumbled outside, gasping for breath. But when she looked around, the school had changed. It was dark, silent, and still. There was no movement, no noise, nothing to indicate life. Only a few lights from the street lamps faintly illuminated the cracked pavement. She wasn't sure if she had stepped into a different dimension or if the school had simply erased everyone who had been there. Her feet moved on their own, carrying her down the familiar path she always took to the bus stop. But when she reached the corner, she stopped dead in her tracks. The book was in her hands, and the last line had changed. It now read, "You are the last, and now you must return." That night, Lena disappeared. No one could explain where she had gone, and her family never saw her again. To this day, the halls of Southbrook High are eerily quiet during the last week of school, especially as the final bell rings. And sometimes, just before the lights flicker and the air grows cold, students hear a whisper, "You were chosen." And every year there's one student who goes missing.